Chapter 21, we're finally there. The birth of Isaac, the son of promise. God fulfills the promise to Abraham and Sarah that he had spoken to them so many years ago. Let's see this incredible story. Verse 1, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant, and she bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son Sarah, to the son Sarah bore him, When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Says that the child grew and was weaned, and on that day Isaac was weaned. Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for the woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. This matter distressed, or it grieved Abraham greatly, because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be distressed about the boy and the slave woman Hagar. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the slave into a nation also, because he is your offspring. So basically what God tells him is, look, Isaac's the son of the promise. Isaac's going to be the one that nations are going to come from, that kings of men are going to come from. You need to honor what your wife has asked of you. He says, but don't worry, I'm still going to take care of Ishmael. He's still going to become a great and strong nation. He says, Abraham, I know that there's tensions right now. I know that things aren't smooth in the family right now, but you need to honor Sarah. You need to work with Sarah. Trust me, believe me, I'm going to take care of Ishmael. Verse 14, early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water and the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, what is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Verse 22, at that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of the forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything that you do. So it's a transition that's taking place. Isaac's been born. Isaac's been weaned. There was tension between Ishmael and Isaac. Sarah wants Ishmael and Hagar out. God says, honor what Sarah asks. So Abraham sends them out. They're struggling in the desert. God says, it's okay, I'm going to provide for you. God provides for them. And it says that Ishmael would continue to grow out in the desert. Then it breaks and it goes back to Abraham. It says that there's a king that says that God is with him in everything that he does. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me in the countries where you now reside as a foreigner the same kindness I have shown to you. Abraham said, I swear it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I did not know about this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. So Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 lambs you have set apart by themselves? He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. After the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called on the name of the Lord, the eternal God. And Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. It's interesting, the chapter ends there after he makes this treaty in the land of the Philistines. The Bible doesn't particularly go out of its way to give one leaning or another, if you will, towards whether this was right or not. But it does share that the treaty took place. To me, I don't particularly understand why he did this. I understand culturally it might have been better for him to make a covenant or an agreement or a treaty so that he could live in the land more peaceably. At the same time, God was his portion, God was his provider. If there's one thing that we see throughout the scripture, every time someone made a treaty with the world, it never ended well. To each his own. How you want to interpret that. I think it's an interesting story that takes place between you have the birth of Isaac in chapter 20, and then you have the greatest ask of all time in chapter 22, which we're going to learn about shortly. But chapter 21 is full of multiple side stories. And I find that rather fascinating, the side story of the fracture of Ishmael and Isaac, the fracture of Hagar and Sarah, and how God still provided for Ishmael, and God still blessed Ishmael, even though it was a picture of when Abraham and Sarah had tried to do things in their flesh and in their own strength. God still took care of Ishmael and Hagar. I find it interesting, the story of the treaty and how Abraham lived in the land of Philistines. And at the same time, it's interesting because even as he lived in the land of his enemies, if you will, he still found peace. The scripture says that when your ways please the Lord, even your enemies will be at peace with you. If there's something about Abraham that's true, even his enemies were at peace with him. His ways pleased the Lord. He was a man who was hospitable. He was a man who was kind. He was not perfect. I mean, we've read the stories. He was not perfect. But he was a man who loved God. And he was a man who trusted God and believed God and followed after God. And because he had a heart for God, God looked out for him and God went before him. It's an incredible story looking through the life of Abraham. And in our next story, we're going to learn about one of my favorite stories in the entire Bible. Can't wait to tell it to you. Be blessed today.